get started? I would like to introduce our Shaker School Board candidates, going from left to right. Lisa Cremer, Alex Liston Dykema, Ayesha Hardaway, and Heather Weingart. So we will start with their minute-and-a-half personal introduction. And we will start with Ms. Cremer.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Cremer. It's an honor to be here tonight, and I'd like to thank the women voters and the library for putting this on. Growing up, I was that girl in science class who needed to know what happened when you added things in a different order than what the directions said. I wanted to understand all the different scenarios and had to see for myself. Not much has changed. I am still interested in the why and the how of things, as well as big picture trends, and I've spent much of my life examining how research can be translated into our complicated society. At Princeton, I investigated how kids' brains work differently despite a similar autism diagnosis, and how to identify ways to best help each child succeed. When I lived on the Navajo Reservation, after receiving master's degrees in public health and social work, I studied underserved Native American populations who needed mental health services and developed strategies to reach out and provide necessary support for individuals and families. I remain committed to the power of research. I care deeply about our community and the needs of its many stakeholders. I want to bring my experiences to the board so that we can systematically work together using research and best practices to advocate for public education, to capture the kids and families that we are missing, to challenge every student to their utmost, and to support the many voices of our community. We need to make sure that we continue to measure what matters and don't get distracted in our efforts to use our resources in ways that provide rigorous, meaningful, and innovative experiences for all students.
Thank you. Mr. Dykema.
Well, good evening, and thanks to the League and the Library for this forum and for everything you do for our community. I'm Alex Dykema. I'm the current president of the school board and the incumbent in this race. Along with being on the school board, I'm an attorney and a consultant who works with nonprofits helping them build their capacity. On a personal note, we moved here 12 years ago looking specifically for a community that would reflect our family and our values, and it's been a great move. 4 years ago, I ran for the school board because I believe we've got great schools and we can do better for all of our kids. Now, I want to build on the progress that we've made. I truly believe in the simple concept that every student should be able to reach their full potential and have the tools they need to have a successful life, whatever that may be. This is not a matter of taking from one and giving to another, but rather one of looking for subtle barriers, opening doors, and consciously providing systemic support to all, whether they're a high-achieving student, one who struggles, or all those in between. I also believe that with a roughly $90 million budget and the majority of our property taxes under its control, the board's fiscal stewardship is critical to Shaker and to our ability to support our programs and every one of our students into the future. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I hope I can continue to serve you on the board.
Thank you. And Ms. Hardaway?
Good evening. Many thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting the election cycle's first forum. I count it an honor to have the opportunity to introduce myself to you all this evening. My name is Ayesha Hardaway, and for those of you who don't know me, I've been in Shaker since 1984. I came here as a young fourth grader, and for the better part of 43 years, I have lived in the Lomond, Moreland, and now the Mercer neighborhoods. I was a member of the last sixth grade class to graduate from Lomond Elementary, and I'm a proud graduate of this school on this stage and Shaker Heights High School. My mom brought us here because Shaker Heights was an inclusive community. It had excellent schools, and it provided opportunities for all of its residents. Excellence, inclusion, and opportunity. That's the promise of living in Shaker Heights in those three words. It's a promise that must be kept through our schools. Shaker schools provided me with the opportunity to go to college and on to law school. And after successfully practicing as a trial attorney, I'm now a professor at Cases Law School. I'm also a Shaker parent. We were drawn to Shaker because to raise our family here, just like my mother was. And we had the opportunity, we had other opportunities for our kids, but the right opportunity was here in Shaker. Now one of my children has graduated and is a sophomore at Washington University in St. Louis, and my son is a senior at the high school. So 2 generations of my family have taken Shaker up on its promise of excellence, inclusion, and opportunity.
Thank you. Okay. And Ms. Weingart?
Thank you. Thank you to the League and to the library for hosting us this evening. I was lucky enough to move to Shaker with my family 10 years ago, and we have 2 children who attend our Shaker schools. I have seen and experienced and believed in Shaker coming together as a community. Shaker is a city filled with passionate and involved residents. I graduated with a business degree from Michigan State University. My experience as a professional in marketing and operations in the hospitality industry taught me how to manage even the most complex budgets and personnel issues to effectively run an organization. I have a long and proven track record of engaging our community in our schools and working to provide financial stability for our schools. I have devoted 7 years in various PTO roles, including presidencies at Onaway and at Woodbury. Most recently, I was the co-president of PTO Council and the chair of the 2017 $30 million successful bond levy. I have seen firsthand the opportunities and the challenges our students face, and I am here to offer ideas and perspective as we chart a course for the future where every student has access to the opportunity and the excellent Shaker education that we can afford them. I will work with our board to engage our whole community in implementing the district's strategic plan. As a team, we will conservatively manage our school finances, we will advocate and study the pursuit of alternate funding models, and thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So, first question, I'm going to combine a couple of them. How do you feel about the test scores in the Shaker schools? How should we evaluate the progress of the schools? And how will you deal specifically with the root causes of the achievement gap?
Could you say with the what of the achievement gap?
The root causes of the achievement gap. And so, Mr. Dykema, you're first.
All right. So I would say I wish everyone could have come to our board work session earlier this week. We spent a lot of time looking at the test scores, both our internal test data and the state test scores. There are questions about the state test scores, but we need to use the information that we can to help guide our decisions. Our internal testing program, primarily the MAP testing program, I think is going to be able to provide a much more useful tool for us, a tool for our teachers in terms of educational input to our kids, and a tool to help us gauge how we're doing. And I think on the root causes of the achievement gap, we're going to get all of this into a minute, I think that part of that is beginning to have those complicated conversations, look at what those barriers are, figure out what ladders we need to put in place to support all of our students so they genuinely have equal access to the opportunities in Shaker.
Thank you. And Ms. Hardaway, do you want to say anything?
Sure, I will say something. Thank you. I think, if I can remember all the parts of the question, that was compounded. I think it's important for us to recognize and stay true to the fact that Shaker does provide excellent opportunities in a number of ways for a good number of students. And that although the test scores are disappointing to all of us, I think as a community, the state test scores, that there are positive things that we should be focused on, recognizing that there is still yet a lot of work to be done. As a member of the Strategic Planning Committee, I'm confident that the course that the district is currently on will address those issues and those concerns. I think we have to be mindful when we say things like root causes, that we have to be mindful that it's important for us to do in our buildings what we have in our wherewithal to do. And I applaud the district for starting Shakers First as an opportunity to address the achievement gap at the beginning of a student's education as they pass through the district.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to add on to what Alex said about going to the board work session the other night, and we were able to witness the board and the administration working together to really dive deep into the MAP scores and the tools that the MAP database does provide our teachers, because one of the things I think is most important in addressing the achievement gap is providing our teachers the tools when we come up with various solutions. They need tools in the classroom to implement those solutions, otherwise it's never going to work out. So the tools that are available through the data MAP database is unbelievable. The other thing is that it's important, I think, as a community to pay attention to when measuring what matters comes out and the metrics that are in there, because the district has spent a long period of time developing those metrics, and it's a good comparison to our state report card. And finally, on Monday, I had the opportunity to see both our senator and 2 Ohio State Board representatives, one former, talk about the state report cards. And I think it is universally recognized that the state report card is not a useful tool for us to measure our district.
Thank you. Would you like to speak?
Yes. To a certain extent, I really think that these tests are an attack on public education, and they don't really measure the depth of true learning that goes on in our schools. I have 3 young kids, and I can tell you I would not be in this district if I was not assured that they were getting excellent, high-quality education. I invite anyone who has questions on the report card to go to the schools and look around, see how the kids are learning, look at what the teachers are teaching them, sit in an IB unit. I would rather have my kids listening to an IB unit on where we are in place and time any day of the week than learning how to take a test. So, thank you.
Thank you. Can you explain the racial disparity in student discipline here at Shaker?
That's my question. Can I explain it?
Yes. That was a question. I just read it.
So I'll say this as a criminal defense attorney currently teaching students how to represent clients. It's called systemic racism. And I know that in a lot of ways may be hard for some people to acknowledge or recognize, especially if you haven't been in those spaces. But I think that the district is doing a really good job of addressing it by starting the restorative practices program. I think we need to be really mindful about how we interact with our students, how we discipline them, and how we expose them to law enforcement. There's good studies out of the Schubert study, out of the Schubert Center. Gabriela Celeste is a member of our community that really talks about how when when teenagers have interactions with law enforcement at an early age, how we're setting them up for failure in many ways. And so I think Shaker is on course to get it right.
Thank you. So Ms. Weingart, did you want to say something?
Yes, so I think I want to touch on a little bit of what Ayesha said, in that I think it's incumbent on all of us, teachers, administrators, board members, and community members, to examine our own unconscious bias, when we take a look at that and recognize that it's there, and then again, coming back to those tools that we provide in the classroom, I want to refer back again to Monday night, where our state senator said that over 36,000 children under the age of 8 had been suspended in the last year in Ohio. And so one of the things that is going to come from our legislature soon is a ban on those suspensions. Now there's a 3-year window that will be implemented in, but during that 3-year window, they're going to be working with the teachers to provide tools so that they can correctly implement restorative justice. And I think that's how we can address the issue.
Thank you. Would you like to say?
Just a few comments. I think that one area where we can really work on this is in elementary school, and as they are transitioning to Woodbury, because I've heard that it is not as much of an issue in elementary school, but then as kids get into Woodbury and middle school, that these issues become more prevalent, and that could be a target area where we can really focus our efforts for restorative practices and making sure we are examining all of our systemic biases and training teachers in restorative practices and in just educating them really on that this is an issue that is going on in our schools, and more African American students are being disciplined than their white counterparts. Thank you.
So I would just add to what Ayesha was saying, that I think that part of this is also engaging in a real conversation. I think that the equity task force that you serve on is a really good start. It is a complicated issue, but it's one we really have to address. If we want to get to the roots of this, we're going to have to talk about uncomfortable topics. We're going to have to talk about the implicit biases that we have. We're going to have to talk about how we can address it and what tools we can provide to our staff and everybody who's working with our kids to help promote situations where we're not getting to that end point. And I think we need to start that in preschool, and I think we need to go all the way through 12th grade. And I think that that's something our entire community will need to engage in. And I actually think Shaker is a community where we can do it. We have the will. It's time to do it.
Do I have the opportunity to comment as well?
Pardon?
Do I have an opportunity to add anything?
Yeah.
I just wanted also to point out, if you're not familiar, we do have a group in the high school called SCORE. And that group of kids that you have to actually apply, and it's a fairly exclusive group of kids, and they are doing amazing work with our K through 4 kids in having those tough conversations early on. So the conversations that are tough for us are not so tough for our kids.
Okay. Thank you. What plans do you have to address the school financial capital budget? The board, the borrowing unit has almost the borrowing limit has almost been reached, and more capital improvement is needed. And that starts with Ms. Weingart.
Yes. So one of the things that is important to point out is that the levy that passed in May actually for the first time allowed for a 1.25 mil basically savings fund for our capital budget. So that's the first time that we've had that, and it will put aside $1 million a year to address our capital needs. Now, as with the city and had mentioned, we do have things that come up as an emergency, and we have to address those as they come up, and it does impact how we'll spend those dollars. And $1 million isn't a lot of money when you're talking about schools that are as old as ours, but it will help in addressing that. The second thing that I would do as a board member is I would advocate for us to explore corporate and private partnerships in a much larger degree than what we're doing now, so that we can start to offset some of the burdens that, like with a pool or a maker space.
Yes.
Yes, our resources in Shaker are precious, and we really need to do a better job consolidating our resources and having our 3 taxing authorities work together. People choose our schools for the teachers and the programs like IB, and we need to make sure we are spending our money on depth. For example, choosing initiatives like Facing History that have been proven to meet objectives and go deep and stick with them. And not only a 1-day workshop, but a 3-day workshop. Make sure that we have a real commitment to it. So my comment is that for spending money wisely, we need to focus on depth over breadth.
So focusing just on the capital part in the question, I think that it's wonderful that our community approved the recent bond levy. That is going to work to keep our students warm, safe, and dry. It is hugely appreciated, and I think that the permanent improvement levy is also going to have a significant impact. I think that it gives us a little space to be more planful. We can, and we are starting to look at what is ahead of us. What are the improvements we're going to need? What do we know is coming down in terms of repairs that we're going to have to address so that we can respond to them proactively? It's much better to replace boilers in the summer than in the middle of the winter. So to some extent, we now have the space to begin doing that. I completely agree with Heather about our need to explore and expand our outside funding potential. And those 2 examples, pool, auditorium, makerspace, things like that, I think are really susceptible to finding funding both from alumni and corporate donors.
And as an alum, I support the idea of tapping the resources of your extensive alumni network, because we haven't done a great job of that in Shaker. There's some phenomenal graduates who love this community. They may not live here, but they want to support the community, and so we need to do a good job of tapping there in terms of outside resources. I also think it's important for us to really applaud the board at this point for, and the levy people people who organized it, for having, for having the wherewithal and the presence of mind to think about creating a savings fund. I've been to a lot of block parties and I've heard a lot of criticisms about the increasing taxes in our community. And the fact that we are now in a mindset where we're thinking about saving and what we can do to make sure that we have resources to make the improvements and building and maintenance that's necessary, I think is really important. And $1 million will go some way. It may not go all the way, but it will certainly be useful, and I think it shows that we're financial stewards, responsible stewards.
Okay, thank you. The school board and the library. Acknowledging that our community is gun-shy about increasing taxes, would you support the process of exploring a merger of the Shaker Library with the county system? A merger that would lower our real estate taxes. Okay, Ms. Cremer?
Thank you. I love our libraries. I have so many good memories of the libraries with my kids. I'm sure you all do too. I love to take them to the play and learn station, and my kids still want to go back to story time. But I also know that we live in a society where we have to think about streamlining our services, because we can't have a discussion about taxes without thinking creatively about our library. So we need to find out more information about what this merger would mean, and then investigate all the options. I'm a researcher, I still need more information for that.
So this is an issue that is going to be right in front of us, and I think it's one that it behooves all of us to look at too in terms of the different functions. So I've had the opportunity to go back through the statutes, and I think it's really important that our community understand that we have an autonomous library board. They are tasked with the process of reviewing the library's needs and addressing the management issues. That comes to the school board if they choose to bring a levy forward, but it's not a discretionary vote. The school board, by statute, just passes that vote through to the voters, and we have the discussion that we should have. I applaud the library board for being willing to come to our Finance and Audit Committee, to have a conversation with us, to share information with us, and to provide that educational forum. But I do think that the governance roles are really important for all of us to keep in mind as well.
So I agree with the governance rules and making sure that we are clear on whose role it is to do what at what time. But I also think it's really important for us to, as a community, to kind of broaden our approach on how we think about the library. We're talking a lot about burden, and I think that there are some of us in the community who think about it as value. And so we need to be balanced and thoughtful about understanding that it's an asset and it adds value in some ways, and then to the extent that it is in fact a cost, there are costs associated, which we may call burden. How do we balance those, and how do we decide as a community, right, what's more important to us? I'm looking forward to that conversation. I think that all libraries, regardless of who owns them, add great value, and we, Shaker being the 17th most educated community in the country, right, needs to have quality library services. So I hope we're going to be prepared for that discussion when it comes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Weingart?
Yes, so I'm going to piggyback on the fact that the library is an autonomous board. I've had the privilege of meeting with a couple of the board members and the director of the library and educating myself on the issue. And I feel for the board because it's a double-edged sword. As a board member or a prospective elected board member, you're really, your goal is to safeguard the future of the community and to protect Shaker. And so when you think about that and the treasure that the library is to the community and how important it is to our community, you have to weigh that with also the costs that are associated with whether or not we merge or not. I also think that it's misleading to the community and to the Cuyahoga Community Library if we were to issue a letter of intent, I'm sorry, if the library board was to issue a letter of intent saying that they wanted to go further when they really don't want to go further, they just want to find out more information. So I do feel for the board. I think what I would do in their position is I would put the issue to a vote and let the community decide whether or not they are willing to bear increased taxes and then go from there.
Thank you. Okay, and Mr. Dykema is going to be first on this. With the disparate resources of the PTOs of the elementary schools, there are significant inequities in enrichment opportunities. How do you think the inequities among elementary schools should be addressed?
It's a really good question. I think that's a challenging question if we're looking just at the PTO funding. I think the district has an obligation to be looking at, again, what are our kids, what are their needs? How can we make sure that every child in our district's needs are being met and allocating resources along those lines? In terms of PTOs and PTO fundraising, I think one of the challenges is people tend to want to raise money for their school, where their child is. And so you get that conflict in there. I don't have an instant answer for that in terms of the PTO fundraising, but I think it's a very good question.
Ms. Hardaway?
It's been a long time since I've been in an elementary school. Well, since I've had a kid in an elementary school. And to the extent, though, that there are inequities that exist in the PTO funding, right? As a member of the Equity Task Force, I think that's something that we should be looking at and being thoughtful about. How do we make sure that the students that are in schools that are maybe not funded as well as other schools still have the same opportunity, resources, and support? And so looking forward to that. I think all of this is a part of that longer, hard conversation that we have to be willing to have, willing to address, recognizing that our common interest is making sure that the children, right, have everything that they need to be successful in life.
Yeah, this is an ongoing conversation at all the PTO tables at all of our 8 buildings. I can tell you that from experience in 3 of our buildings sitting at those tables. And there's not a person in that room that doesn't bring that conversation to the table every time we sit down. I can tell you from a council standpoint, having that experience, there's a couple of things that I think we can address from a council standpoint. One of the things that was implemented the year before I took over as president was a $5 donation on Pay For It. And before that, we virtually stopped fundraising from a council level because people in schools were doing it at an individual level. We implemented that, and in 1 year, we raised $5,000. And the council's money is to be shared across units for enrichment programs for all of them.
Thank you.
So I am on the PTO at Lomond, so I feel this issue. I have friends in all other elementary schools, and as a whole, our budget for the PTO at Lomond is the amount that is raised in one event at some of the other elementary schools. And our school has 43% free and reduced lunch at Lomond, and that is 10% more than the district average. So I would love if maybe we could, even as PTO leaders, we could learn from the other PTO leaders in the other schools. Maybe we could have a meeting. I'm just looking for ways where we can get more resources to our schools that need it the most.
Okay. This is going to start with Ms. Hardaway. We have a couple of questions about non-college bound and students who will pursue non-traditional lives after high school. What does Shaker have and what does Shaker need to provide?
As a foundational measure, I think we need to start thinking differently about what success looks like. We talk a lot about academic success and whose kid is getting what recognition in terms of going on to college scholarships and the like, but we need to broaden our understanding of awards, I think, in a lot of ways, and making those students who have different passions and have different outlooks on how they'll succeed in life feel welcomed and engaged in our spaces. And so I'm hopeful that as we think about even equity in our buildings and closing the achievement gap, that we will find ways to connect students who are not on the traditional path of excellence in Shaker, but nonetheless, certainly it's in our interest for them to succeed in life and be able to feed themselves when they graduate from high school, right? And so thinking about how we connect them with mentors.
Thank you. Ms. Weingart?
So this question actually hits at something near and dear to my heart. I've had the pleasure of the last probably 6 to 8 months working with a group of parents who is actively working with the district and the foundation to put together a makerspace initiative in our K-4 middle school and high school. They have spent time researching these spaces all around our surrounding communities. And if you're not familiar, a makerspace is an opportunity to grow entrepreneurship, hands-on experiences. It really engages kids who might not be engaged by the traditional paths. I think with the progress that we have made with this group in the last 6 to 8 months, you will see an outcome in the next year. The foundation is on board. They're talking about an innovation fund. We really have made some significant progress there, and I think that's one of the key ways that Shaker can address this.
Thank you.
So thank you. Just tying into what Heather was saying, I think the 21st century or next century jobs really are going to be robotics and STEM, STEAM driven. And if we can focus our efforts on science, technology, and implementing that and integrating it into the IB curriculum, that is where we can really get ahead of this, because the IB curriculum and STEM science work really well together. They're both inquiry-based. So if we can just kind of build our science in the IB curriculum, I think we can help address some of these non-traditional students and help having other paths that are not just college, AP, some vocational type maker spaces would be a really good idea.
I would build off of all that. I think the makerspace initiative is very exciting. I also think that we do need to address the fact that not all of our kids are going to college, just like not all of our kids going to college are going to Harvard. There are a lot of good outcomes for children to become adults, to have successful lives, and we should really be focused on providing those tools. You can be a welder and make a very good living here. That's just a fine choice if that's the direction that fits for you. And we should be providing those resources. Now, we are part of the Tri-Heights Consortium, and we will have access to Cleveland Heights' resources, which would be wonderful. But we also need to work in-house on making sure that we are encouraging kids to follow their passion and giving them the tools to be successful in achieving that.
Thank you. Okay, we'll start with Ms. Weingart. Shaker Schools recently won voter approval for bonds to accomplish district-wide repairs and maintenance of its buildings, postponing a substantial project to replace or repair the middle school. What are your plans for this building?
What are my plans for the middle school?
Yes.
You can do air conditioning.
So as I mentioned, I actually chaired that campaign for the $30 million bond issue. When I first signed on to chair that, I actually signed on thinking that we were going to try for $55 million in a new middle school, and I was a part of the process of talking through that and working with the board and the community and making the final, when the board made the final decision to go for the $30 million. So what it really comes down to is my plans for the building, of course, is if I were elected, would depend on working with the team, but I think that this building does need to be replaced. However, we need to do a better job of communicating to our community at large, to the 75% of our community that doesn't have children in our schools currently, and talking about what our plans are. And that education is a long-term plan. I'm talking about 5 years worth of having people in the schools once or twice a year, reaching out to them, to our seniors and to our parents with preschoolers and inviting them to events. And I'm talking about communicating with them through quarterly town hall meetings. So that's what I would do with the building.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Cremer.
So this is one of our questions, so you can read my answer online. But I'll just read a part of it. People choose Shaker Schools really for the excellent extracurricular programs, IB, and opportunities that the teachers who provide these options. We just got this bond levy passed. Now we need to have a clear plan moving forward that addresses the needs of the physical structures, but also focuses on spending money in the buildings. And as I said before, depth over breadth. We need to make sure that we are spending money on the people and the resources that will help our students learn better.
So I have to say that the bond levy vote was a very challenging vote. That was a hard decision for the school board. I think it was the right decision at the time for a lot of the reasons that Heather mentioned. I don't think that we have done an adequate job communicating to the community. I also think that there's an opportunity to leverage private funding. And I don't think we were in a place quite to do that. I think that this building has educational challenges in it, so that we should be addressing it, we should be talking about it. It should also be part of the conversation that we have as a community about how we're going to handle enrollment trends. What are we looking at down the line? What is our long-term master plan? It has to be part of all of that, and then I think we will need to come back to the voters if that's the direction we choose to do. But there are pieces that need to get filled in, and I'm very hopeful that we can fill them in and get a really exciting project put together. But it will take time and communication.
So I agree that a detailed discussion needs to take place, but most importantly, I also think that on the communication end, right, there is a levy in place and there are going to be improvements made. And I think it's important for us as a community and those who are eventually in place to lead on the board to think about how we are giving periodic updates on the improvements that are made with the current money that we all are spending, right, or contributing, and then what existing needs still exist, are there, right, existing needs that exist, redundant, so that the community is not caught off guard and completely unaware when it's time to make plans for what needs to be done, that we could be fully informed and engaged in the process.
Okay, thank you. This is going to be the last question, and it's going to be sort of open-ended, and how do you deal with issues that City Council doesn't have to deal with? And so there's been questions regarding transportation, changing the transportation, changing the school day so that the younger children go earlier and the teens can sleep in later, transgender issues, and whether it's appropriate to have students required to say the Pledge of Allegiance. So my question is, how are you, as a school board member, going to approach tough issues? And we'll start with Ms. Cremer.
Thank you. So I will just take this as a broad question. How are we going to approach tough issues? I think we really need to be proactive. And that means making sure that all the relevant stakeholders are actively involved. And if we are making a change is wonderful if we can be excited about that. And the way to get people excited is to communicate. So if we can get a plan going and communicate to people, that would be great. So just a bit on late start, that is an issue. I understand the science, I'm a scientist, and these decisions do not take place in a vacuum. So we would have to really think about all the other cascading effects that would happen, and it's an equity issue as well, because there are kids whose parents work in other communities, so if they are going to school 15 minutes, 30 minutes later, it's going to impact a lot of other things, also late in away games. As for transgender students, that is an issue where I think that's up and coming, that the school board will have to work on and come up with a policy, and I would like that policy to extend to all schools, down to elementary schools too, because kids younger are having
Thank you.
So I think one of the questions is, how do you get the information, how do you get the right answers, and what's the role of the board in it? So going from the back forward of what Lisa was saying, the transgender issue, our non-discrimination policy historically just addressed gender. It didn't include sexual orientation, gender identity. There's a role for the board. We've changed that. It now does. It should. And that needs to trickle down in how we approach things. I think on a lot of these issues, they are complicated, and there is direction. We need to be a conduit for community information coming into us and out of us, and we need to remember that we have experts in all of our buildings, teaching our children and running our buildings, who can provide us input and direction on those topics.
Thank you. Ms. Hardaway?
Yeah, so on delayed starts for teenagers. I think it's important for us to recognize that there's still a lot of discussion and science that needs to be evaluated for that, right? I'm all in favor of doing what's best for the health and wellness of our kids, I also think that once we are clear on the science, there are a couple of districts who have actually started late start times this school year in Ohio, two in Youngstown in particular, and I think it's important for us to be mindful of that, maybe in communication with them, to learn what we can from them about their process. But we also need to be having communications with our community, right? Because it will have intended and some unintended consequences for everyone in this room and other folks not here, right? So we need to be clear on that. As it relates to the pledge, the U.S. Supreme Court says that students cannot be compelled to recite the pledge. So we should all know that.
And all of our students should know that.
So I'm going to take the broad approach to this question, because while I would like to discuss in depth each one of those questions, it's a pretty heavy question. But we have time outside afterwards. Here's a really succinct, short answer for you. Research, communication, and consequences. So when it comes to these kinds of issues, I think it's extremely important that we take a look at what our neighboring districts are doing, what's happening on a state level and a federal level, and we also engage our community. And that goes to the topic of communication. We need to have open forums. Some of you may have seen yesterday, I was on Facebook Live talking about different questions that you may have had. We need to have transparency and have those kind of open conversations. And the third thing is the consequences. We need to be very cognizant of any decision that's made at the building level, when it's with the superintendent or the teacher's responsibility or the board's responsibility, of the unintended, as Ayesha said, unintended and intended consequences of those decisions.
Thank you. And so everyone got a chance, right? Okay, so that's the conclusion. I want to tell you, I am so impressed with this audience for the questions that they provided. Again, I have a whole stack of questions up here. So if yours didn't get answered, meet the candidates in the back. We'll take a little bit of break as these folks leave, and Judge KJ Montgomery comes up, and let's give them a
school system and have lived in 3 different locations in Shaker. We have a single judge court. Our single judge court handles about 12,000 cases a year for 5 different cities, including Shaker. That includes Beechwood, University Heights, Pepper Pike, and Hunting Valley. And we hear only adult cases. With reference to what we do, we handle mental health, we handle first offenders programs, we handle heroin addiction, we handle domestic violence, and in those capacities I have served on any number of committees, and I know there is a website that you can go to read about the work that I've been able to do. I would suggest that you look there. I will tell you at this point I am sort of the grande dame of all the municipal courts. I am the municipal court liaison for the Northern Ohio Municipal Judges Association. So that means I sit with your county executive, I sit with Common Pleas Court, and I sit with lots of area agencies in how we use our funding and how we do our various programs and how we might better improve the service that we deliver in the criminal justice system. So with that, I would just ask you any questions you might have for me, or if you prefer to stampede out and talk to all those amazing candidates, I would understand.
practice of charging fees that are onerous to many defendants?
So right now we're in the crosshairs of a lot of things. It used to be that municipal courts were considered cash cows, and our funds that we raise as fines and costs go to, first, the city of Shaker Heights to support what our building, our lights, our operations cost, and then they come from all the other municipalities in the form of fines, and they go back to those municipalities for their general funds. So the cost of everything we do, if it is not borne by the defendants, or if you will, users of the courts, it is borne by the taxpayers through their property income taxes, primarily through their income taxes. This is a very difficult issue that we've been looking at, in that you don't want to unduly punish those who are economically deprived, and yet you have to look at other ways to make them still make amends for their crimes without it being monetary. And we do that every day through community service, through various programs where they might contribute in a non-monetary fashion.
Thank you. How can the municipal court make Shaker a welcoming place for immigrants?
Well, we just got a new rights form from the Supreme Court of Ohio today, and we said, where's the one that's in Spanish? So we have an opportunity through our Supreme Court to have free access to interpreters and free access to attorneys that we may appoint to help individuals who might not be familiar with the justice system or the process in our various community to at least communicate in a meaningful way and be represented in a meaningful way through these processes. Many of our population that is not so familiar is also not familiar with laws, whether it be traditional ways of households, raising children, things like corporal punishment. We deal with a multitude of people who are coming to this country in a way that they need to understand our laws, but not have them unduly impact them. So I think education is a huge component, and with the Supreme Court's help, we are getting to reach more of them now.
Do you have any concerns with the moving of the jail to Solon?
The judge only sentences people to jail. So Pepper Pike's got to decide where they're going to put their folks, just like University Heights does, and Shaker chose to put their people at Solon. Fortunately, because of electronics and IT, and people are much smarter than me, we video arraign and speak with those defendants live TV, like Skyping, through video arraignment. So the only issue we have had with Solon is getting our public defenders to run from our court out to Solon to visit their defendants and then run back in order to represent them here in time. There's one other aspect, and that isn't a court function. But the city of Shaker Heights rents a block of cells. If you rent a block of cells, you may not nearly be so concerned about who's sitting in them and how long, because you own the space. So we as judges read that jail list from all 5 cities every day to make sure people are not being unduly kept in one jail, in one cage, as they say, versus another.
Would you please talk about the heroin epidemic and its impact on our court?
It's the most scary epidemic we've had when it comes to the drug community. And the reason is because once you have impacted these adults who are addicted, and they have tried to make a change. I have an alcoholic in my family. If my alcoholic goes off the wagon, he's going to go on a binger. I'm going to get him back. A heroin addict, once they decide that they understand the dangers of it and they try to recover, and they relapse, they're going to die. And Rob knows this as well as I do. The heroin epidemic has brought a new, very realistic trouble. I have had defendants from Beechwood that I have left sit in jail for 5.5 weeks because they were totally detoxed. And we couldn't find a bed for them, and we knew if they walked out and used, they would be dead. So heroin has presented an enormous problem that we never faced before when it comes to relapse.
Any more questions?
Seems so easy.
I look forward to you. I want to say this to you. The court is your court. We are open to the public. Lots of interesting stuff goes on there, so please don't be a stranger. Unless you're a defendant.
Thank you so much.
Unless you're a